she's a little cutie pie.
Isn't she cute?
It's changed your life.
She totally has.
Okay.
So we've been in and out of these seats a couple of times. She has changed my life. I mean, I guess you knew me pre-baby and post-baby.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and you look really happy.
Thanks. I know we talked about this last time we met, but I never would have imagined that motherhood would feel so right, because it was not something that I had thought I would embark on.
Yeah. Yeah, it wasn't part of the plan.
No. But isn't that it? That's the thing. It's like so often we have an idea that we have way more control than we actually do have in our lives. Really.
Exactly.
On so many levels. Yeah. And I think when I got pregnant with Joni, I thought, oh my God, it's so true. We don't have control. I mean, because I got pregnant with an IUD, which I think I've shared on the podcast before. But, you think you take all these precautions and you do all these things right.
You plan.
You plan. So it should work out the way that you want it to. And, I mean, it has. But I wouldn't have known that.
And that wouldn't have been the plan that you put in place for yourself.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
Definitely not. But thank God it happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been really grounding for me in the fact that, I've been such a people pleaser a lot in my life. So then having a baby, a child, has been like, hey, Deandra, you don't get to just like please all these other people anymore. You have to be clear about what works for you, who you're willing to have in your life with your kid, and what type of work you're going to do. Because now let's get focused. You only have this amount of time.
Yep.
And so decide. And it's been the best thing for me. I'm like, okay, focus.
Yep.
What matters?
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, and you get to give up the pleasing, which is really quite freeing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
To say the least. Like, I think it's so scary when you're, I don't know, do you identify as a people pleaser?
Oh, big time. Like, first 30 years of my life.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, totally. And I think we were socialized to please.
As women?
And I think even societally, it's in the paint. I think we're socialized to please and expected. And if you push back on it, we're troublemakers.
Totally. Yes. Or, if you're a woman, you're a bitch.
Absolutely. Or whiny.
Whiny. Yeah. Bossy.
Yeah.
That's that thing. Yeah, it's I say this often when I'm working with people too, because I've walked the path of, and I'm still walking it. Like, it's not ever done. Like, let's be clear about that. But this learning how to speak up for what you really need, and learning how to say, hey, no, that doesn't work for me, is really hard at first. Like, it's so anxiety provoking. But then once you start doing it, all of a sudden you're like, whoa. There's this new sense of freedom, like you said. And you're like, I can do whatever I actually want.
And they don't have to define who I am.
Yes.
Or what or how. They don't get to define who I am or how I should see myself based on what they think or do or say. Mm-hmm. No, it's quite freeing.
It is really freeing. Yeah. And it's taking those steps. And I remember Pat Neufeld is a friend of mine, but was actually my professor in my Masters of Counselling. So I remember in my Masters, one of the questions you gave me to sit on was, what would happen if I upset people?
Really? Oh, I don't remember that.
Yeah, you wrote it on a sticky note. We were doing supervision, and you were like, okay, this is for you to just think about. And it was, what would happen if you upset people? And I still think about that, when I'm thinking about a decision, and I'm, okay, am I going to do this based on fear of what if I'm going to upset someone, or if I'm going to do this because I need to do this. I'm like, okay, what will happen if I upset this person? And then I even go there. I'm like, okay, what would happen? They'll be mad. And then what? They might say mean things, maybe, if they get really mad.
Might not talk to me again.
Like I might, but then I'm like, okay, if I lose that friendship or that contract or whatever it is, because I really can't do this, then is it valuable? So yeah, it's good questions to ask.
Well, then sometimes it's those questions that, they just sort of sit with us, or I don't know, I think, those powerful questions, they just give us the opportunity to think, okay, I don't have to be confined to what somebody else says, does, thinks.
Yeah, and I can actually be myself. Because here's the thing, is when we're not speaking our preferences or our needs, or being honest about what's not okay for us, or whatever it is, right? We're not actually being honest with people in our life. Like, that's the issue, is that, and then people don't actually know you.
Nope.
And that's huge. Like, people don't really know who you are and what you desire, what you need, if you never let them in and be clear about what's okay for you and what's not.
And I mean, I think that it's an interesting way to think about it too. But I also think that's something that's not valued in our society, to really communicate in that way about what you really need, or what you really want, or who you really are. I think that's really scary for some people.
Yeah.
Like, it's really scary. So when you have the opportunity to, I don't know, develop that with someone, that's a pretty sacred connection.
That's a good point. It's true. So when you have those relationships where you can really be honest, then those are ones to cherish.
Yeah, because I don't think they're every day.
No. And do you think then, so this is making me think, Pat, do you think then when we have the expectation that everybody's going to want to know our needs or be receptive to that, maybe that's not a reasonable expectation, because our society right now is so not conditioned in the way where you can have those conversations?
I don't know. See, and I guess in my head, I don't think I would think or consider that everybody would want to know me in that way. I think it would scare them to death. I think they go, yeah. But I guess if that's the gift that comes when you meet someone, you engage with someone, that there is that connection, so, I mean, obviously that question that I've long forgotten, it resonated with you. And whether it, gave you a new way to think about yourself, or released a piece of that sort of script that we're fed, I think those are the moments, those are the gifts, that's the part of the journey that I think is the rewarding piece. And then I'm sad that other people either don't have that, or don't even know that that's not what they're capable of doing.
Yeah, that is hard. And then how do you, when we work with people, or just even have people in our life, it's like, how can we share, like, oh, there is more, like, if we can open up a certain part of ourselves to see or experience those things, that there is something that you can get out of those moments that carry on beyond that moment, whether you consider it spiritual, or it's just like, it's real connection with someone.
Yeah, I mean, I think good question. Can all people do that, have that? I would think so, because that's I mean, I think that's our free will. But I think it's really scary for some people.
Yeah.
Because I think it feels like like Pandora's box. What happens if I can't stuff it all back in?
Right.
What if I'm judged? I mean, there's all those what ifs.
What if they hurt me?
What if they hurt me? What if I'm not lovable? All of those things. And yeah, if I go back to what society puts on us, or how we've been conditioned, it's a lot of work to pull back those layers.
Huge.
It is.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, we've had sort of that counseling training, and then we have made a conscious choice to say, okay, I'm not only going to pursue this in my professional life, I'm going to emulate it, or I'm going to have that be who I am, so I can be authentic and congruent. But that's work.
It's a lot of work.
And it's scary work. Because what if it's those what ifs? But I think when you get past that place and kind of go, oh, I know so much more, and I understand so much more than I did 10 years ago or 20 years ago, that's powerful.
And when you pull back those layers and then you start to have the connections or the moments, then that's when it's worth it. All the digging, all the stripping back, all the facing the scariest parts of ourselves. And it's like holding hope or when we work with people, it's like, there is more than just these fears that are, or these negative thoughts or these fears that are governing the way that we're engaging with one another. But yeah, it's scary work.
Yeah.
And I think about too, Pat, a lot one of the biggest things that you've instilled in me, and I know in other students that you've worked with, is what you just said, that if you're going to do this work as a counselor, if you're going to sit in the chair as a counselor, you also, need to do the work personally. And that was a high standard that you set right off the bat in our degree.
Not one that everybody loved.
No, because it's not easy.
No.
It's not easy, but it's so important because now that I'm in private practice and doing the work, there's days where I absolutely get in my own way. Of course, right? And if I don't have a self-reflective practice, I could spend a lot of time beating myself up about like the things that I think I did wrong. Because, that's me coming from my fix-it mode. Like I'm responsible for this person getting healthy. And even that, which is not the way that, I need to go about counseling somebody.
Right.
But if I didn't have a self-reflective practice, I could easily, for me, get tripped up on that stuff regularly, that it's my fault, or if, I need to be in fix-it mode during the session, or I need to be in problem-solving mode, which is absolutely not the type of work I like to do with people. But if I wasn't looking at that and looking at myself, I could easily spend years in that place.
And then the one that's even scarier for me is the practitioner that can't, won't, whatever, be in self-reflective, but sees themselves as the sage.
Yes.
Sees themselves as, well, let me tell you what your problem is. Or if you would only, all of which I think is just perpetuating of really society or how we're conditioned. I don't want to put everything on society, but just sort of that superficial. Because if it were that easy, people wouldn't have the challenges that they did.
Right.
They'd quit their addiction, or they'd leave the relationship, or they'd find their whatever that it is.
Yeah, they would just listen to the people telling them all in their immediate life that are saying, stop doing this, stop doing that. So when you go to counseling or therapy and you have someone who's like, these are the things you need to do because this is wrong. Are we really doing the deeper work? Like maybe you're managing symptoms right off the bat, right? Like sometimes I think it's important to have a little bit of like, for some people there's safety in, a couple tools. And then you can be like, here's some tools. And then once you feel like, okay, I got this, let's.
Then we can go a little deeper.
That's right.
Yeah.
But that's very different from what you're talking about, which is a practitioner that is, kind of how we've portrayed counseling in the media and stuff, right?
Absolutely.
Like the person behind the clipboard who is like, so how many nightmares have you had?
Yeah, that's right.
How many drinks are you having a week or whatever? Here, lay on this couch and let me analyze you. That's how people perceive counseling.
And let me tell you what's wrong with you. Yeah.
Like how messed up you are. No wonder people don't want to go to counseling.
And who we can blame.
Right, like your mom.
Absolutely. Unresolved issues with your mother.
or your father. It's that Freudian thing, right? It's like Freud really made an impact on counseling, psychotherapy. It's like we can't let Freud go.
No. Well, and that was his own stuff.
Surprise.
Surprise. But all he was doing was working through his own stuff.
Through theories and top-down approaches and here, let me sit in this chair and tell you what's wrong with you.
I guess it's kind of humorous, but you think of, when I was presented with Freud in my master's program, and then really all these years later, 40, what I really see is the dilemma in that Freudian perspective. It's that new understanding again. Yeah, pretty profound.
It's pretty profound. So it's been 40 years. So can we talk a little bit about your
Yeah.
educational history?
Yeah.
If that's okay.
Yep.
So you were first a teacher.
Yeah, so I did my undergraduate in music education. So I taught high school vocal.
That's so cool.
Yeah, and really, so that would have been mid-'80s.
In Canada here?
No, so I was in the U.S.
Okay.
Yeah, I was in the U.S. And I think it was probably my first year of teaching that I just remember thinking, whoa, these kids have experiences, lives that I couldn't even relate to. Like, I remember a junior high girl telling me she'd pulled her first train. I didn't even know what that was.
I don't even know what that is.
Well, it's multiple sexual partners.
Oh, wow.
In
okay.
one night, yeah. Yeah, and she was like 13, 14. And it was a rite of passage for her. And so anyway, that was the reason that I started the master's program. And
because you felt like that you needed to support these kids more, or what do you think the drive was?
I think it was more understanding. I think I wanted to understand the human experience. And I think I only saw the world from my worldview. And I think just growing up in a conservative family, I think I just had a very, very limited worldview, and I guess in your 20s you do, or maybe you can. And I think, some of it was maybe to be a better educator, better teacher, and to understand kids. But I think I was also on my own personal journey of understanding. So I did a master's. And what was kind of interesting about it was that in the master's program, one of the faculty he was the chair of the department, had sort of said, I think you need to go on for your doctorate. And so that's kind of how it fell into place. And they basically gave me a faculty line once I had done my coursework, was doing my dissertation. So,
wow.
Would I have planned it? Absolutely not. Would I have thought I was smart enough? Never. But yeah, it just sort of, it basically was given to me. It was really...
It unfolded in front of you.
Yep.
And so was that a master's? Did you do a master's in education counseling?
No, so the U.S. programs are a little bit different. And actually, it's called a Master of Science, although it has nothing to do with the sciences.
Yeah.
But degrees were either Master of Arts or Master of Sciences. Those are really the only two master's degrees that within without going into medical and all of those kinds of things that the U.S. would offer. I don't even know that there are any programs that offer a Master of Education. Why? Couldn't tell you.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then your PhD was a PhD in the sciences as well?
So a PhD is actually a doctorate in philosophy.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So are all PhDs a doctorate in philosophy? Is
Yes.
that's
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah.
I think
so
you
they're
told
a
me that
doctorate in
before.
philosophy, and then they would be housed within a certain school. So
Okay.
mine was in the College of Education, but it was a PhD in counseling and educational psychology.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And then you ended up being a professor?
Yeah. So I started that. Okay, let's think about years. Yeah, I finished my degree in 99. So
Your PhD?
So yeah, a little more than 20 years ago. And jumped right into academia, but those same people-pleasing, thinking I had to climb and move up the career ladder.
And do what they said you needed to do.
And was it ever enough? And yeah. And yet, has it been the most rewarding, phenomenal career choice? Absolutely. I have loved the interaction with students. Teaching has been my great love.
Yeah, you're
No doubt
an
in my mind.
amazing educator. You
you.
really, really are. There's, I've had a lot of teachers, and I don't have my PhD, but there's certain people that are educators, and you can feel it, and you are an educator,
Thank
a self-reflective educator, which is really hard to come by. you teach through experience as well, which is really profound, especially in this field of study.
Well, and I know you've probably heard me say it a bazillion times, but Carl Jung said, I teach what I most need to learn. And that has always stayed with me. Because for me, it was true. This was the journey that I needed to learn. It wasn't that I needed to teach it, but I think for my own, why am I here? What am I supposed to do while I'm here? How do I connect with someone? How do I help them find what it is that they haven't been able to find within themselves? And I think we do that together.
Yeah.
I don't think that's something I give you, but yeah, it's a journey that and I think we're always more with another person because of it.
Yes. But that's also why the education, I think right there is why you're a great educator, because you see it as a collaborative experience, that when you're working with people, that it's not just you teaching the students, when you're supervising or when you're supporting, it is a collaborative thing where you're with that person. And that, again, is something that I've taken very much into my practice when I'm working with people. It's like when you're in the space of counseling with somebody, that is a sacred space.
Absolutely.
It's a spiritual space. Whether, I get all weird when I talk about spiritual stuff, and I've disclosed that on this podcast before, but what I do know is that this work is spiritual.
Absolutely.
When you allow yourself to step into the space with your client or the person you're sitting across from, opposed to that top-down approach that we were just talking about, it's a different thing. It's a collaborative experience. And you get to witness someone in their vulnerability, which is profound. And there's something freeing about that for me. So I get that out of it too. But then, if the relationship works out well with that client, you get to experience them become more and more empowered and more themselves, which is... I don't know if there's anything better.
No, there isn't, because it's that when they gain that insight, because you've sat with them in the moment, or you've maybe asked, that question, that you just see that they're starting to either understand their experience or what happened to them, or any of those things in a new way. It is. It is spiritual. It is sacred. And if you think back to supervision, those experiences happened there, but you also sat with students that was way too scary for them, and they couldn't and wouldn't go there. Yeah. And so it was, they would look at you as either you had 10 heads or it scared them to death. I don't know which, or maybe a combination of both.
I'm laughing right now because I'm recalling a memory of coming into class. When you say looking at me or looking at someone like they have 10 heads, it's like sometimes I would feel like I would come to our practicum class and I would be a mess because I was going through so much as I'm like working with clients, working through my own stuff. And I would look around and I'm like, why am I the only one who's a mess here? Yeah. At least it felt that way. But I specifically remember one moment I had come in and I was carrying so much shame about smoking weed. I don't know if you remember this.
I do remember it. Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God, I'm a counselor that smokes weed or like uses weed. And I was a mess. And I sat in our practicum table and I was like, I smoke too much weed. Just like this confession. And everyone kind of started laughing because they were like, how much weed? Or, everyone's like, how much Deandra? And I'm like, I don't know. And everyone's like, well, we drink a glass of wine. Why is it a big deal if you...
What's the difference?
And I was like, I don't know. Yeah. And it was a huge moment for me because I was so ashamed that I was a counselor who was using smoking a joint, Yeah. And everyone, but I used to come just a mess sometimes and I would think, they think I'm crazy. And I would feel crazy until after we spoke about it. And I'm like, okay, this is okay. I'm just doing the work.
Yeah, it is. And there again, it always fascinates me, I guess, even after all these years, that experience could be so different for the same people that are in the room, which makes me think about families, because same thing, it's a system. You know, their experience growing up is so different than a sibling, and how that could and did play out so differently for all the individuals in the room. Yeah. And finally, would it have been different if you'd ran 8 miles that day? No.
Right.
But we put a value on it. Like, I must be awful.
I must be awful because I do this.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that was, I mean, it seems so small, but it was such a big experience, because I remember thinking, like, I'm so messed up. All these other people in the room have their life together. Here I am smoking weed sometimes to get through, and then confessing it and all the shame, and everybody just being like, hey, it's not that big of a deal. But yeah, I mean, for you to have experienced so many people come through your life as an educator, and seeing different people respond differently to the different studies and the practice, I mean, that must have been...
You know, I think, and it is. I mean, that's the joy of it. I mean, I sometimes worry that I dashed people's dreams that I thought weren't. It wasn't often, but there were times that there were students that I didn't think they were healthy enough, or they just they hadn't developed the skill set. And I guess I saw myself as a gatekeeper, and especially in Canada, because it's an unregulated profession. Yeah, I often wonder, or I don't know if I worry, maybe I worry, that was I too hard on some students? I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting hearing you say that. I mean, of course I want to respond and be like, no, I don't think you are. But it is like one of the things that I think you embody, even though you've just shared, like, I've struggled with being a people pleaser, is that, you know, you've, at least from, I know, not just my perspective, other people that have been supported by you in the educational journey, that you walk a really great line of, like, I will be supportive and careful and care, but I'll take no shit. Yeah. And there are some things that have to be very clear if you're going to do this work. And I've appreciated that, because now, as I'm in the field, realizing how unregulated it is, yes. I can see why you would feel that way as someone putting people through a program to graduate them into a world of counseling. It's scary.
Well, and I don't know if I said it to your group, but, you know, when you graduated, I wanted to know that I could send my mother, my sister, my best friend, and you know, I wonder if nurses, medical profession, sort of think the same way. But there is that care, that and not that I want to tell horror stories or war stories, but there have been people that have been really hurt, and that word doesn't even encompass it, by the counseling profession. Mm-hmm.
It's important to say
crappy
that.
Professionals.
Yeah.
Who have no regulation whatsoever.
And might have like 2 or 3 courses in counseling, yeah. Or even not even that. They might have the education, but yeah. It's true. And this is why some people, and I know we all have people in our lives who have said, like, I went to counseling and it was horrible.
It was awful.
It was awful. Like, this is what my counselor said to me. Mm-hmm. Like, I had a friend say to me, my counselor asked me if I was autistic.
Ew.
And I was like, whoa, that is, you know, it's like things like just no care just seems like very frivolous, questioning, or, I mean, there's so many horror stories. Mm. And so when people talk about going to counseling, I often say, like, read the credentials. Mm-hmm. You know, you need to ask, like, where did you get your training? What are you certified with the body? And then even that's confusing, because we have like a BC certification body and a Canadian certification body. Yeah. And then there's people that have like a 1-year addictions counseling diploma versus like,
or call themselves a life coach. And there again, I get all those things. And yet I think from a consumer perspective, like, I have never asked my GP where he ranked in his class. I mean, not just,
Can you imagine? Maybe you should, actually.
yeah, maybe I should. But I mean, and there again, that's just, and yet, from a professional perspective, wouldn't you want your client to say, okay, what's this experience going to be like for me? What kind of preparation training did you have? Because it's an intangible product. I don't give you something and you take it home and you unwrap it or you ingest it or no. And that's I think where maybe the misuse of the relationship has occurred. I don't know. I guess going back to, I did see myself as a gatekeeper, right or wrong, because I think the human experience is one that we have to understand. It's how much damage we can do.
And how different it is for every person.
Absolutely.
Right. So if you go into this profession thinking that there's like one path and you're gonna direct people on this one healing path, you got it wrong.
No, or one answer, or one fix, or one, technique.
That's right.
No.
And that's when we try to, what do I want to say? It's about empowering the individual, right? And to be a person, to practice empowering somebody and allowing them to experiment and make mistakes and come back and have a safe place, but yet gently guide them in questioning and self-reflection and curiosity. That's tough work.
Absolutely.
That's way tougher than, hey, let's talk about assertive communication today.
Yeah.
This is what it means to be. It's very different.
Yeah. And it's that whole or when they don't, but how and when a client gains insight is partially due to our skill and our facilitation of it, but we can't make them gain insight if they're not ready. Clients are not going to go where they don't want to go.
No, and if you drop that insight.
That's right. And if you provide that insight when they're not ready to hear it, that too is damaging.
Yes.
That's that whole, you know what your problem is?
Yeah.
If only you would.
Yeah.
No.
Have you noticed this?
Yeah. One thing I noticed you do is, not helpful.
It feels critical.
Yeah.
It feels really critical. So so I have a question, Pat. So when people, if you were to say to somebody who wanted to embark on counseling, what do you think is an important thing for them to suss out with a counselor?
I think I would, like if my sister or a good friend of mine came, and I think I would say to them, I would say to the counselor, this is what I want to work on. Because as you and I know, that's the smoke screen. But I think a client has to come with and say, I want to work on my marriage, or I want to make this life transition at 40, and obviously you start to peel away the layers, but they have to be able to articulate what it is they want to work on. And then I would encourage them to ask, what perspective, or, we're not going to ask theoretical, but, how would you work with me on that?
Yeah. Like, what's your approach?
Yeah. How would that be for us? And, you and I both know if a model says there's 10 sessions that are paid for, that's a whole nother ethical dilemma, but we have to work within that framework.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
It is important, like, even when clients reach out to me, sometimes it's just like, I just know I need help. And I really, really encourage people, for my own sake, like, what? And I always do a 15-minute or longer phone consultation with clients before I even accept them into practice, because I need to know that I actually have the skills to work with what that client's bringing.
Yep.
Because at the end of the day, it's those counseling relationships that I don't have the skills to support that feel the worst.
Absolutely.
They do not feel good for either person.
Right.
And I think that that's another dangerous thing that we can get into as counselors, as practitioners that say that they can help anything.
That's right. Yeah.
Like, I do anything. I do all the things. I can help with any type of problem. And it's like, okay, no, let's be clear. Like, what do you have strengths? Like, is your strength grief? Or maybe you have a strength in a certain modality that deals with lots of different challenges, but like, you know, find out from the client, or as a client approaching a counselor, knowing what you want help with and seeing if that counselor is versed in that area is probably one of the best things.
Because the dilemma, as you well know, I mean, if it's private practice work, or even if it's not for profit, I mean, when you're always looking at a bottom line, when you're looking at a revenue generating, that if your strength is bringing in the numbers, that doesn't necessarily always fit with what the client needs.
Yes.
If you see them as a deposit at the end of the hour.
Yeah, that is a ethical dilemma as a counselor. You know, I was talking with my brother the other day, and he's such a business mind, and he starts talking to me about numbers, and we've had this conversation, you and I know, and he was like, okay, so bottom line is you need to make this amount a day, this amount of days a month, and that's going to give you this amount of money.
Clients.
Yeah. And so his number was, I need to see six to seven clients a day. I know. And for those of you that aren't watching, Pat just made a very like, ugh face. Because
it's not possible.
It's not possible.
Unless you were, well, I don't even know if somebody that had been seeing clients for 20 years. And I'll digress and then I'll come back. I have a good friend that was the therapist for American Airlines. And she said, and she had done this work for many years. She said, I never see more than 5 clients a day and never more than 3 days a week. She said it's too much. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but anyway.
No, that sat with me when we met last, because I I definitely know people who are doing more than that.
Yeah.
And I mean, bless their hearts, everyone finds you're walking your own path, right? Mm-hmm. But for me personally, if I see 5 a day, which honest is quite rare, if I see 5 a day, I'm hooped. I come home and I'm a mess.
Yeah.
And I don't mean like an emotional mess. I mean like, it's hard to explain, but my brain feels like mush. That's the best way that I can put it. Spiritually, I'm drained. I just feel like...
well, if you think of all that output,
yeah,
there again, and when you are tracking with someone, or, I mean, there's that mental tracking for 5 hours in a day, that's a lot of work.
Yeah, being present for
Absolutely.
5 hours, because as soon as your attention lapses in a session, you miss something.
Absolutely.
And you have to say, sorry, I missed that. And I mean, you're human, so it happens. But yeah, no, the tracking and just the emotional exhaustion of being in the space of vulnerability as well is a lot, energetically, physically. Mm-hmm. So yeah, my brother had said, well, Deandra, I don't know if you're really going to be able to make a lot of money doing this. Because I said, I know, like, that's not a reality for me. And we started laughing because he was like, he's always pushing me to make a better bottom line. But I don't think you go into this work for that, is what I'm getting at. I don't think you can.
No, I don't think you can either. I think if you wanted counseling then as a moneymaker, I think then you should be an author or something. I mean, there have to be other ways to generate income or to supplement it. But no, it's too tiring.
And that's the other thing, is like, you are the resource.
Absolutely.
You are the resource. When you're owning another type of business, you might have other people be the resource, or like the clothes that you're selling or whatever. But in counseling, it's a finite resource. Yes. It's not infinite.
No, and it isn't tangible.
Right.
I think that's that sacredness of it.
And you can shut off and see lots of clients in a week, or you might be able to compartmentalize. But I find if I have a really busy week where I end up seeing more clients than, say, my suite number, I pay for it. Mm-hmm. I pay for it in my exhaustion, in my inability to be present with my daughter, which, I mean, I'm also a new mom, so I'm managing like output at work, and then I'm going home and caregiving almost all night as well. And so I don't have those resources to give. So it's made it very, very clear to me. But I also wouldn't want to be seeing a counselor who doesn't have the time and energy. Like, people are paying a lot of money, which brings up another thing. Like, counseling is expensive.
It is. So again, who is it for? Which is a whole nother dilemma that I struggle with. I mean, if it's for wealthy, middle class, what are we exacerbating in our world?
Yes, 100%. This is a big thing. And actually, my biggest challenge as being in private practice is that prior to this, I've always worked with people that have multiple barriers, very high barriered clientele. I've worked only in not-for-profits my entire career until now. And I'm seeing middle class, middle income, mostly people. And it sucks in some ways. I love the people I work with.
Yeah.
But
it's a luxury.
It's a luxury. And, I've been reflecting on how, and we talked about this, but how I could create that balance and do work with individuals and not-for-profit. But yeah, counseling is for the middle class, the wealthy, because it's, like I charge $120 an hour, but I don't know if you know this, but I think the going rate in Kamloops is significantly higher, and there's some practices charging upwards of like $165 an hour.
And who can afford that?
Not me.
No.
Honestly, I can't afford that.
No, and definitely not someone that's in survival mode.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Having a hard time keeping a job.
absolutely.
It goes on and on. So yeah, it's an interesting practice. It's an interesting field of work, of study, and it's growing. It's growing. It's very popular now. And everybody wants to be a life coach. Not everyone, I'm over-exaggerating. But it seems like there's this huge push now for being a life coach, being a counselor, being a yoga teacher, anyone, like being in this place of authority or knowledge and helping people become their best person has become really big.
Well, and it also, sadly, I think, but it's tied to dollars, because we're hearing, our biggest crisis, our mental health challenges, or loneliness is a huge piece. So when people see this as, ooh, here's a chance to make some money. Again, that becomes ethical for me. And I mean, I think we really have to think about why is there limited access?
And how do we fix
counseling?
it?
And and what happens when you're only surviving? How can you possibly even think about all the mental health components of it?
Yeah.
Can't.
You can't.
No.
And where do you go, right? It's like you might go to adult mental health or some of the free programs, which are also great. But it's a big conversation. It's a broken system. And I'm happy to help people who can afford it. But I wonder, the people who are maintaining jobs aren't really the same.
No.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like, there's people that are in such survival that they can't even keep a roof over their head.
Exactly.
And they can't even, or they're so deep in addiction. Like, those are the people that we need to be working with. And I mean, everybody needs support. But yeah, it's definitely a hierarchy of access.
Yeah, which, there again, when I texted you yesterday about this book, Waking Up White, I mean, just so many things that are sort of stuck in our white middle class world that what's a luxury? So anyway,
It's a good question.
Yeah, that's a conversation for another day.
So Pat, I know I sent you a bunch of questions.
Yep.
I kind of want to ask you what you think our biggest challenge is right now
In our
in our society. Like, what is something that keeps coming up for you that you're like, oh, this is where our attention needs to be as a culture? I mean, it could be local or broader. Is there something that you think about often?
You know, I do, and I'm going to kind of do two prongs on it. And whether it's, you know, again, sort of systems and what we were raised with or what we were taught, I think, I don't think we either don't know how or we don't, just because of the world or chaos that we lived in. But I don't think we know how to connect with each other as spiritual beings or as entities, and whether that's, you know, just our lifestyles or whether that's the demands. So one of the things, and I will absolutely admit, I know this is a luxury as I'm starting to think about retirement, but one of the things I've sort of set for this year, for 2020, is I want to figure out how to be more generous. And I don't mean, you know, with donations or even with time, but it to go beyond that, and to think about, you know, how can you be generous with someone that you've never met before, and it might just be in passing, and if that's, you know, someone in despair or someone needing assistance, and how am I generous with my spirit, or with forgiveness, or with letting go. I mean, I think of all the different ways that I probably have kept going over the course of my working life, just because that's what I thought that I had to do. So now how can I be generous with letting that go, because I'm really embarking on something new. I'm not quite sure what it is, but yeah, as I think about this next, and my friend teases me, Pat, it's not a chapter, it's a book. So
Yeah, you're into a big transition.
yeah.
So how can you be more generous? That's beautiful. Because right away we think financially.
Yeah,
right?
no, this isn't about money. At least not for me.
But how can we be, and I was just thinking about attention, like how can we be more generous with our attention to others, to community, whatever that is. But generosity as a practice it's a really beautiful way to put it.
So I'm still thinking about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what are our biggest challenges? I mean, I think, again, it's multifaceted, but it's intergenerational, it's systemic, and how would that be for all of us? I mean, no matter what we do, or if we could sort of break free of some of those shackles, wouldn't that just kind of be
amazing?
Yeah, it would, yeah.
I was listening to this podcast the other day, intergenerational healing. It's like healing the lineage is what it's called.
Yeah.
I have a favorite podcast. It's called Bliss and Grit podcast. It's
okay.
It's really good.
Okay.
It's like psychology, spirituality, self-healing, and they take a trauma approach, which I mean, you know, that's an approach. Even though I'm starting to realize that the word trauma feels pretty icky for a lot of people, so that might not be the best
sort of
language.
Like self-esteem from the 80s.
That's right.
We've overused it.
We've overused it, but healing the lineage, and it was such a big podcast because we've talked about intergenerational trauma a lot. But what if we shifted it into a broader perspective, that when we're doing this work, we're healing a whole lineage of things, right? It's not just us that we're healing. You know, we have ways of being.
That's right.
And is it the Indigenous people say it's 7 generations back, right?
Yeah.
And we actually there is one strand of DNA that is just information.
Yeah.
Where that is all it is in our body. And this information, it's like a blueprint from our mothers and our fathers. And so we legitimately are carrying ancestral baggage forever. And so when we it's important to remember that when we're embarking on this healing path, it's like we're carrying some heavy loads. And so we need to be really gentle with ourselves about that. But there's also something really exciting about the fact that if we do this work, it's not just hours that we're doing.
No, I see, and I absolutely agree with you, because I think when we do it, and I think there's an understanding that comes from it, and a healing and a forgiveness, I think that changes the energy force for past generations. And I mean, however you sort of think about that from a spiritual perspective, but we don't have to be, sharing this space to provide healing for others that have long left. I don't think.
Interesting. Yeah, it's
or is that too
no, it's not
out there?
It's not too out there. I think it's reality.
Yeah.
Like I think we're silly to think that what we are now is just us.
Exactly.
I think
totally
that
agree.
perspective is very shallow.
Yeah.
I mean, we are physically made up
Yeah.
of what came before us.
Absolutely.
So how could we not emotionally and mentally and spiritually be made up of what comes before us?
Exactly. And when we understand that, it goes back to that pleasing. So if I understand how my mother or my grandmother were conditioned, or their experiences, and how that all sort of fed into those pieces, that strand of DNA, it's quite powerful then to let it be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be so shameful. And this is also bringing up I've had this thought a lot, because on my healing journey, I went through this period, and I know other people do, where I was uncomfortable in my life. Things were happening, and I was like, okay, the way that I'm behaving, I'm being quite broad, but like it's now dysfunctional. It's no longer functional for me, so I need to figure out a different way of being in this world. So I embarked on counseling. And then in that journey, I became really angry with my family and my past, where I was mad because, my parents did this to mess me up, and this happened, and it's everybody else's fault. So I went through a really big period of blame, right? Like, all you guys made me so messed up, and I have all this trauma and all this baggage. And that led to way more disconnection with the people in my life. And I was with a counselor at that time, which, wasn't regulated. And I know we talked about this, and maybe didn't have, there's a lot of great things I got from that relationship, but there were some things I didn't, which was compassion for my family, and learning how to find more connectedness with the people that are close to me. Instead, it was like more boundaries, more disconnection for my healing. So that lasted a long time. A lot of blame, a lot of anger. And then I would say in the last couple years, I would say even maybe just having a baby, having a daughter, and realizing, okay, there's a lot there. Like, my parents are humans, and all this stuff. But then I started to think about this idea of evolution. And we talk about evolution from a biological perspective, like we evolve physically. But I think back to what my grandmother had to endure.
Absolutely.
And the life that she had to live to get our family to a place where they had their basic needs met. Like, I come from a long line of really hardworking, poor people, that have a lot of hard work genes, lots of like, we're just going to go. And if my grandmother didn't do what she did, I wouldn't be where I am right now, in this privilege, sitting in this chair with all of this equipment and, this beautiful space, and more.
Yep.
But it's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like, my family in the last 3 generations has been working on the needs thing. Great. Thanks. I'm sorry that you didn't have the energy to meet me or meet my mom in her emotional needs. Yep. But the other stuff was getting met. Yep. And we're evolving. Yep. And you know what? Now I'm looking at the other stuff. Yep. Because they couldn't.
Yep. And I think in Gabor Mate's perspective, which I think that just opened up another thing for me, is that I don't think we'll meet anyone that got all of their needs met.
Yeah.
No.
No.
And so at whatever age, and if I can do that with my clients, but I think to figure out, this is what I didn't get. This is what I needed. That I didn't get from my family of origin or my extended family or whatever it is. And then to understand how that played out for us. And maybe we made some poor decisions, or maybe but then I think once you understand that, then you can shift. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's a little shift. Sometimes it's a big one. Sometimes it's forgiveness. Yeah. And sometimes, and I guess from my perspective, I'm trying to be generous with people that are still trying to figure that out. So.
Mm. Yeah. I remember in our Gabor Mate conversation, our workshop, I think we were both there, and he said, can you put up your hand if you had a good childhood? Was that what it was?
Normal
childhood. And then I think a couple people did, and he's like, no, you're fooling yourself. It's like
didn't happen.
Didn't happen.
Not possible.
I'm glad you have that perspective. But I think that's a huge thing what you just said about realizing that none of us got all of our needs met. No. And that's not to diminish the pain that comes from that. Nope. But at some point we have to come to terms with the fact, and for me, actually, I should speak for myself. For me, I had to come to terms with the fact that I didn't get my needs met in certain ways. And that was painful. And I either need to try to meet those needs now. Yeah. Do I still have those needs that aren't being met?
Absolutely.
Am I continuing that pattern of not meeting those specific needs that I've said I needed? Yeah. Right? And reparenting. People call it's like reparenting yourself or inner child work or whatever. It's like, okay, what do you need? Can you get that for yourself? Yeah. And having relationships in your life that fill some of those places. You can find people and friendships and relationships that fill those little places in your heart that you need if you're open to being in that vulnerability with people.
And I think if you understand it in a new way, I think and some people don't like the word forgiveness, but I think you can make peace with it in a different way, within yourself or with the world, with family, whatever that might be.
Yeah. Forgiveness is a hard word, but making peace. Yeah. Because I had to ask myself too. It's like, if I sit in this place of being angry and frustrated with the life I've had because of the choices that have been made or whatever, how is that going to serve me? Mm-hmm. How is that disconnection with my family or these people going to serve me? Mm-hmm. Is it going to make me happier? Mm-hmm. It's a good question. Mm-hmm. Am I going to be happier if I'm resentful for a long time about these needs not being met? Yeah. I remember having a breakfast with my sister while I was thick in it, like very angry about, our experiences. And I was sitting there with her and she has such a different way of looking at things. And this is the thing, you can have two kids from one family and they have completely different experiences. Yeah. And she's 7 years older than me. So we have completely different experiences. Mm-hmm. And I was complaining. I'm going to call it complaining because I was very much in this place. And I'm complaining about, and I was like, yeah, but that was so traumatic. Like, we went through that and that was so traumatic. And she looked at me and she was like, yeah, and it was beautiful. Think of all the beautiful things that we had as a family. And she was pushing this on me. And at that point, I'm like, she's dismissing me. In my head, I'm like, this is dismissive of my experience because I just want to be heard in this. But that was my kick in the ass. I got to be honest. With my sister was like, at some point, I don't know if she said these exact words, but it was like, at some point, Deandra, you're going to have to move on. Like, get off your soapbox.
You can be angry for a while, and it's okay to be angry, but do you really want to spend your whole life angry?
Yeah. Totally. And and then like I said, having a kid, having Joni has been the big thing that's like, Deandra, come on, there's way more to this than just like somebody trying to hurt you.
Yeah. And if that resentment, that sort of triggered something else in my head, but if that resentment is sort of the core or the taking up all the space, there's no room for joy.
Yeah, that's huge.
They can't coexist.
No,
They
and
cannot
pleasure.
coexist. Yeah, they cannot coexist.
That's big. That's a big one, Pat.
It is,
can't.
isn't it?
It can't. You
No,
can't
no.
live in resentment and in joy
Yeah.
at the same time.
Yeah, I don't know if I'll go a different direction again.
That's okay.
I don't know if I've ever talked about the author Henry Nouwen that wrote The Return of the Prodigal Son.
Yes, you've talked about this.
I've talked about him, but the other one, and I think that one sort of hit me. But as he talks about that resentment and joy can't coexist, neither can judgment and compassion.
Ooh,
Yeah,
that is true.
yeah. And so if I stand in judgment, and even of myself, that's without all the other things. But if I stand in judgment in myself, I can't be compassionate with myself.
Yeah, they can't exist together.
No, they can't.
I mean, at least I can say I've never experienced them together. I've never experienced being in resentment and having joy
Nope.
in a situation.
Nope, not possible.
No. And that comes that brings me back to the people pleasing thing too.
Absolutely.
When you people please, you become resentful. And then you can't
Absolutely.
enjoy those relationships or enjoy those things that you said you would do when they didn't work well for you.
Yep, because you're not focused on that. And you can't focus on it because you're busy resenting not being able to say no.
Yeah. This is hitting a really big thing for me because I've been listening, because I've been so much in the trauma perspective and helping people or supporting people. And I've been listening a lot to a new perspective around trauma, which is attuning to pleasure and attuning to joy and rewiring our brains in a way that we spend our time thinking about positive memories. So instead of, when we're in a place of having a really traumatic past or experience, what would happen if you went and spent time replaying really positive things in your life, but like really replaying positive memories, like noticing the feelings and noticing those experiences, because so often we become fixated based on things being traumatic or difficult on the negative.
Yeah.
That
and
we
it's
don't
that reframing.
It's the reframing, but it's a deep reframing. When we talk
Absolutely.
about CBT or different cognitions, we'll be like, oh, I love myself, or like instead of thinking I'm fat, you think like, oh, I just have fat. And that can feel really superficial. But if you sat and were like, okay, I feel fat today. And then you were like, okay, can I think of a memory where I was more valuable than my body, where I did something that felt really empowering because of my skill? Okay, I'm going to sit and replay that memory. I'm going to really think about that memory. What would happen in your body, in your experience? I'm sure.
Absolutely.
You would have a shift.
You'd let it go.
Right.
Or let it be.
So it's a reframe, a physiological reframe, not just a cognitive reframe.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's been a big, wow, okay. We focus so much sometimes when we do the work on the negative, like getting rid of the
Absolutely.
negative feeling, the resentment. Okay, well, what would happen if we attuned to more joy in our life opposed to continuing to attune to the...
And maybe we can never get rid of it, but maybe we have to, there's another way. There's another frame. There's another side. There's another perspective. There's another way of understanding.
There's infinite ways usually.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's not a black and white thing.
Mm-mm.
Yeah. Crazy. The human experience is a really profound thing.
Really is.
So Pat, I feel like I know you, but I don't know you. I'm just kidding. But I do want to know. So I sent you some questions. I do want to know, is there a really defining moment that you've had in your kind of journey to personal growth that you are open to sharing?
I thought about this after you sent them yesterday. I really don't know that there was a moment. And I'll go back to what this about counseling. I will say it's been a process. Because I think defining for me has been the more I have understood myself and understand it really does that word doesn't quite encompass it enough. But I think it really has allowed me or maybe it's, again, I feel like my words are inadequate. But I think it's given me permission, allowed me to be with others, to show up for others, and as you sort of talked about my teaching, but this good friend of mine, who's a nurse educator, she always laughs at me that when I talk about things that have happened, she goes, "Pat, they're body parts." Sort of like, get over yourself. They're body parts, and yet. She always says, and you just open up your head and let your students just look in and fish around and pick at it. Well, I think that, it's two very different perspectives, but I think defining for me has been, I'm always more because of the relationship when I give.
That's beautiful. So it's that process.
Yeah, and I think there have been some powerful moments in my life, but I think it's been more of a process for me.
That's very wise. It's true, because you might have, when I think about that, I might be able to say, this is a defining moment, this is a defining moment. But then I know you've maybe been around a bit longer than me, that at some point it's like, yeah, it's a process. It's not really about one defining moment, but, it's an experience of going deeper or opening up or...
Well, and even as you talk about age, I think the last time we chatted, when I think of who I was in my 20s, who I was in my 30s, and now I can say, my 40s and my 50s, and here I am just beginning my 60s. So, yeah, that's a whole lot more decades than you have. And thinking about, again, that process and the learning or the understanding or the becoming.
The becoming. Are you a spiritual person, Pat?
I would say I am, yes. Yeah. I don't think it's by accident that we're here.
No. I don't either, even though I say that with my teeth kind of closed. I'm like, there's something, yeah.
Yeah, I think we're here to do something.
The reason why I asked that is because you said in our becoming. That's, that even just saying that entails so much. I think that's a beautiful way of putting the process, the journey inward yet outward is the becoming. And if we're committed to the becoming of ourselves, whatever that looks like, then I think that's all that we could really ask of ourselves in this life.
And the becoming often occurs because of the pain.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you're not called to do that work unless you're uncomfortable.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. I say that a lot in session with people. It's like, pain is a gift. I don't say that, but I say, like, we have to get uncomfortable before we have to change. It's just that is.
Yeah, have to sit in our discomfort.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And
part of the process of becoming is, that awareness. And I experienced the journey of blame, in my becoming so far. I had this quite a long period of blame. I'm going to be honest.
I think we all do.
And I might go back there, but I'm feeling a little bit more removed from that. But also this place of awareness of what wasn't working, but unable to change it.
Yep.
And that is for me, and I say this to clients, a really difficult place.
Yeah.
Because you know that you don't want to be acting a certain way or doing something, but yet you're unable to change that behavior. You're stuck. Yeah. But it's in that stuckness, if you can commit to being aware in that stuckness, and for the majority of the time, like we all numb out, and you might have to numb out from time to time because it feels really gross. But if you can commit to being in that awareness, I guarantee you something will shift.
Absolutely.
You will shift.
Absolutely.
Because if you have to sit in your discomfort over and over again, and it's really that uncomfortable, you will not behave the same way over and over again. Nope. But if you avoid your pain, if you decide to escape it over and over and over again,
you're stuck.
You'll stay there.
Yeah, you'll stay stuck. I agree.
Yeah, you'll stay there. Yeah. And that's okay. If that's your journey for 10 years, Okay, that's
in
fine.
that moment. Yep.
But awareness,
Yep.
being in the pain,
Yep.
that's the only way through. And I don't even know that it's through. That's the only way
Yep.
if you want to become.
I agree. Absolutely agree.
And no one wants to hear that. I don't even want to hear that.
No, because it's hard.
It's hard.
It's hard, and yet it's fruitful.
Yeah, it is very fruitful. And it might not be, here's the thing too, is that it might not be fruitful all the time.
No, but nobody said it would be.
Right. And you need pain to keep growing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've been so attracted to Buddhism, and I think I've shared this with you. Buddhist philosophy, Buddhist thought. Because there's this underlying agreement that like suffering will exist. And, when you first come to Buddhism, you're like, wow, that's so negative. Like, why would you want? But it's like, no, if we can just agree that you will suffer.
And it's inevitable.
It's inevitable. And you will die, also inevitable. Then what? So if you know those to be true, how will you live your life? If you know that you're going to suffer, will you spend the same amount of time running away from the suffering?
Exactly.
I wonder.
Complaining about it.
Yeah. Letting it engulf your day.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not talking from a place that I don't do this. I still do this too.
Yeah.
Where it's like, oh, that I didn't get any sleep last night. This is the worst. And but if you just accept, like, what, there is going to be suffering, and what am I going to do with that suffering? Am I going to avoid it? Am I going to be with it? What about the suffering of others? That's inevitable as well.
Yeah. And how can I be generous? What does it mean for me today, in this moment?
That's really good for a people pleaser, isn't it? That's a really good question. How can I be generous? Because oftentimes when we're people pleasing, a lot of us are generous people.
But that's not what this is.
No.
No.
No, you're not being generous by saying yes all the time.
Nope.
That's not generosity of spirit, that's for sure.
Nope.
No, you're just setting that person that you're giving all the things to up to be resented.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that relationship to also be on false terms. Yeah. So do you think you're going to miss teaching?
Yes. Yeah, because it's been my great love. But I don't know what it will be, but I think there is another thing, and maybe it's another teaching. But that's coming.
Absolutely.
I just don't know what it looks like yet.
And there's no point in really planning anyways.
No, and yeah.
Do you think you'd ever consider a private, like working with people in a counseling capacity?
I might. Yeah, I might. I kind of dabbled with it. We'll get through this year. This is the last year of phased retirement. We'll get through this year, and then I think I'll sort of put some feelers out.
Yeah.
And if the door's supposed to open, it will.
Totally. You have so much. I still feel like you have so much left to be generous with.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
I do. I think there's something very, very powerful there. I always dreamed like, okay, if I were to do a PhD, I'd want to do it with Pat.
Well, you can stick me on your committee. That's not a problem.
Okay, great. Oh man, I've been digging into that stuff, but I'm like, new baby,
Yeah,
PhD.
this isn't the time.
No, and I wonder too about academia, where it's going and what it means.
I worry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've been, this is a bit of a can of worms, but there's a lot of, there's a huge shift in culture on campus. A lot of social justice warrior stuff. Do you know what I am saying when I say that? And being someone who's previously identified as a social justice warrior. But it's, so for those listening, I mean like extremely leftist ideals, but then using these ideals to actually behave in ways that are not progressive at all.
Right.
Using violence of words and violence of body and even like protests that are violent and things like that in the name of being progressive. But that this has become a big thing on campuses, especially in the U.S. And there's a book I was reading called The Coddling of the American Mind by Jonathan. Oh, I can't remember. I'm going to put it in the show notes. But anyways, he was talking about academia, and he's a professor, and the culture on campuses as well, and how the culture of critical thinking and open conversation is dying, and that people won't have difficult conversations because it's too uncomfortable and they're getting too triggered. And then there's a lot of people like, I'm triggered. So then universities are no longer a space for these conversations, and professors are being highly criticized by students. And then there's the whole other thing around like whether professors are getting paid well anymore. And I mean, it's a big thing.
Yep.
So I question whether those institutions are really
And
what's going to happen.
Yeah, is that part of our shift too? And I don't have a pulse or my finger on the pulse of that to even probably speak with any knowledge.
Yeah, me neither. But I think I see from the outside things are shifting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what that's going to look like for us as a society, I don't know. I think learning and education is becoming more and more accessible and free. But
I also worry watered down.
That's right. I was just going to say the quality. And then the quality of conversation is being watered down, unfortunately. Watered down and violent, both, right? So it's either watered down and shallow or highly explosive and harmful.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. It's why I think podcasts have become so popular, is that we can witness people having conversations.
Yeah.
Which is like, it seems to be both a dying form and we're texting all the time. We're not having conversations. And now podcasts have become the hottest thing. It's like listening to people talking to one another about challenging things. It's like, okay, let's be real, people. We want to hear. We want to have these tough conversations, but it's difficult for us to step into them maybe personally. And
They're work. They really are. They're hard work.
And disagreeing's hard work.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Speaking. I don't always like the expression speaking our truth, but being authentic and being congruent.
And asking questions, right? So when you disagree. Yeah, in the university used to be a place for that, to have those conversations, to disagree with people in your class. And I mean, I'm not in the university now, but I've heard from people that it's not the same. But yeah, it's, so who knows what's going to happen, but conversation is most important, I think. Yeah. So thank you so much for being here today.
Thoroughly enjoyed it.
I always enjoy having a conversation with you.
I do too.
Yeah.
Always feel more.
Me too, sincerely. And Pat, I value our friendship so much, but I've also just valued being able to learn from you in the space that I have. And when I say learn from you, it has never felt like a hierarchical dynamic, but more like you were placed in that spot of being a teacher because of the value and knowledge you have, not because you asked to be put there, if that makes sense. So thank you for that. And for coming and sharing your thoughts with the people that are listening. And so usually this is the time where I start plugging people's social medias and YouTube pages and so on. But folks,
I don't need to worry about it. Give you my book list, my reading list.
That's exactly what I was going to say. This is your chance to hear Patricia speak. And, you're not going to be able to find her on social media. So, but maybe she can give me some book recommendations that I'll link in the notes. And we'll just be so grateful that she gave us her time today, and we'll cherish that. So thanks for being here, Pat.
Thank you, Deandra. This means a lot to me.
Have a good day, everyone. Thanks for listening.